Most founders would say, I would love to start a company and 5 years from now, 10 million in revenue, 4 million in profit. I'm getting paid a nice salary. Everybody's getting paid. Everybody's happy. That's the American dream. But for a VC, that's a failure.
Welcome to SaaS That App, building B2B Web Applications, the podcast where we share real-world stories, practical advice, and tech insights for those building or thinking about starting a tech-enabled business. I'm your co-host, Aaron Marchbanks.
And I'm Justin Edwards. Each week we bring you the stories, strategies, and insights you need to build your SaaS or tech-enabled business smarter, not harder. Let's dive right in.
Hello and welcome to SaaS That App. Just across the screen from me, as always, is my co-pilot, Justin Edwards, who I understand managed to squeeze in a 10K training run yesterday. Congrats, and hey, Justin.
Hey, yeah, it's a big achievement for a fatty like me, so go me.
That's amazing. And our guest today is Evan Shubin, who, among many other things, is the founder of Results.now, Inc., a fractional C-suite operator for startups since before fractional was a buzzword. He is also the co-founder and COO of Half a Hire, a startup that helps lean teams scale faster, and founder of Candlelight Partners, where he backs the startups he believes in with his time, brainpower, and business chops. He has helped launch and lead over 25 plus startups, including ventures in esports and AI and web applications. And today he's here to give us a little peek behind the curtain of how smart operators build software that actually solves problems. Evan, welcome to the pod.
Thank you, Aaron. Thank you, Justin. It's great to be here today.
Fantastic. So just diving right in, Evan, you have been obviously a founder, a co-founder, an investor many times over in building and supporting startups. You've seen a lot of evolution in the space. So I guess my first question is, what is something about how we build or approach software and SaaS businesses today that makes you think this is better now?
You know, one thing that's better now is the tools are better, right? So when it comes to apps, even in terms of just, Figma being a clickable kind of MVP that isn't really fully functional, but allows you to test things, allows you to beta, allows you to show potential customers. What I say to young founders all the time is, build an MVP, bootstrap it as quickly as you possibly can, because you're going to get some things wrong. You're going to make some assumptions. You're going to get some things wrong. And then on top of that, get it out there and have real beta testers that give you real feedback. So certainly there have been a lot of developments in the app building world that allow you to do that better and quicker and cheaper and faster. And so those are the two most important things. Get to MVP as fast as possible, test it out, get it out there, and have beta testers use it, because I think a lot of founders fall in love with their idea of what they think is a shark bite problem, something that's monumental. They might be right, they might be wrong. They're almost never 100% right. And so the faster you can get that MVP, the faster you can get beta testers using it. You can learn what's missing, what people are hungry for, desperate to pay for and use. And that's the most important thing.
So how do you advise someone who's kind of at that phase? Like maybe they've gone through Figma and got a clickable prototype up and running, and they're now putting it in front of people. Do you recommend like structured user interviews, or just like plop it in someone's hand at a restaurant, or what do you advise people to do?
Yeah, so I think the step before that clickable prototype, the step before the Figma is customer discovery until you're blue in the face, right? So I think it's important to do, and I call it blue sky customer discovery. You go in with open-ended questions. What do you hate about taxis, right? This is Uber, customer discovery before they built the app. What do you hate about the taxi service? What do you hate about going to doctor's offices? What do you hate about preparing your taxes? And of course, there's some subtler ways to ask that question, but that's really what it comes down to is you've got an idea that you think there's this, burning need for, and you might be right, you might be wrong, but what you want to do is let people sort of go off and talk about what they hate, what really is problematic in the space. What do you hate about esports training? What's missing? What's the gap? What would you pay for? And let those conversations go and do a lot of them, because the first 5 are not necessarily representative of the next 95. I'm a big fan of the I-Core program. It's an NSF program that's nationwide, and their focus is 100 customer discovery interviews a week at the national level. It is a grind. It is a gauntlet, but it forces you to understand that, doing 10 customer discovery interviews does not get you what you need because you're just not sure if those 10 are answering the right questions. And it's never the customer's fault. They're trying to help you. Most people like to be people pleasers, and everybody loves a good startup story. So they want to brainstorm in blue sky, but if you lead them with questions, hey, I've been thinking about building an app that does X. Oh, yeah, that sounds great. No one's going to say, well, that's stupid, or no, I wouldn't use that, or well, I'd use that, but I'd never, ever pay for it. So taking just that step back from the MVP first is to really do that customer discovery till you're blue in the face and make sure you're onto something as best you can. Then build the MVP, then get it out there, because there's still going to be features and functionality that are home runs and that are total strikeouts and not important to anybody.
Sure. So going through this and gathering this discovery phase, as we'll call it, these customer pain points, ideas for improvement in a particular space, right? How do you take then that step and get that translated into actual product decisions when you're going to build this application? So, you got through the discovery process, you got all this reasonable amount of data on pain points and wish list items. Then how do you take that and turn that into something to be built now?
That's the magic question, right? The $1 million question. That's really the tough part. After you've listened to the crowd and heard what they've had to say, how are we going to build it? And that's where you need, one, subject matter experts, and two, technical experts to say, well, this is how it's done. It's easy to look back on something, like Uber and say, oh, yeah, that's how they built it. And I don't know anything, by the way, about Uber. I don't know the founders, nothing like that. I'm just use it as a great example of a disruptive technology that, that came out that maybe I certainly wouldn't have thought was necessarily going to work for a variety of reasons. I would have poked a million holes in it. But ultimately, they built something and got it to work. So, Aaron, apologies for dodging that question. I am not the one to help with that part of the process, right? That's when the technologist comes in, and says, well, look, this is what we've heard. And this is what the problem is. We need an app so people can get a ride right now, map it up. So how is that going to work? I think that's really the tough part. And that's where you've got to have a developer you can trust. You've got to have someone who can think about these things from the 100,000 foot level and translate that into the ground level. So I don't have any silver bullets or big words of wisdom on that. I just try to, in these situations, understand enough of the data and understand who I can trust to make decisions on how the functionality comes together.
Sure. So taking it then to that person, these subject matter experts or development team or what have you, let's assume that the founder, the creator, the idea generator has what they need and they're now ready to go forth and make this MVP. How would they go about vetting or selecting a development team or a subject matter expert to get it to the next step, assuming that they don't have one in their pocket?
Also a great question, and also one of the toughest parts of the process. I think I probably share the experience of many founders and startup executives when I say that I've had bad experiences with a lot of technology developers and app developers out there for a variety of different reasons. I think this is where you have got to do as much homework as you possibly can. You want a company that has been around at least for 5 years, if not more. You want them to have done a high volume of projects, and ideally, you can call people that are not on the list of people that they tell you to call, right? References that are not on their list of references. Not that things don't go wrong sometimes, and nobody's perfect, but you want to hear an honest opinion from someone, hopefully, who is happy, a couple of people that are happy. But it's about, doing your homework. You don't want someone who's just getting started and super hungry, but you want someone who's a little bit hungry. So look at options that are not necessarily, in those big metro areas. The other thing I'll say is I don't have any problems outsourcing offshore. Half a hire is offshore fractional support for administrative workers. It's not at all about technology, but, I've seen that work extremely well. There's absolutely no border that magically causes someone to be good at coding or not good at coding. There's some of each. But what I do believe is you need a native English speaking project manager, someone ideally at the app development company who is truly native speaker. And again, no disrespect to other countries, but things do get lost in the translation. And so I don't mind if the coding's being done somewhere else at a lower rate, but people that are overseeing that project have got to be able to understand what's needed. And there's got to be that common language. They've got to, I think, have grown up here.
Yeah, I think communication issues are the primary issue with going offshore. I mean, there are other challenges that come up with that, but if you are launching into a project where the person who's doing the implementation arm of your project, especially they're doing 100% of the implementation arm of your project, is not someone you can communicate with extremely directly and extremely effectively, it's really bad news. So I appreciate you for calling that out. It lines up exactly with my experience as well. So kind of going back a little bit to getting the MVP, kind of selecting a team or all that, I've seen a lot of people talking about trying to make sales and close deals before they even have a product, where they're getting people to put down money for the idea of something. Is that something you recommend? Do you have a reaction to that?
I'm not in favor of that. I know that, certainly any small business and especially startups, cash is always going to be tight, and it's great to have revenue at the right time. But I do believe, first of all, nowadays that a lot of people don't plan on paying for apps and are not motivated. And what you need is a lot of users. That's the key. Is it okay to start charging when you have a functional app? Yes. And I've done it that way, but it will slow your growth. And I think that's a mistake I've made in the past, is, insisting that once we had a good product, really sort of second round, beyond really second MVP, that we started charging for it. And there were reasons for that at the time, but in hindsight, the startup failed. And one of the reasons it failed was we couldn't get enough traction, enough users, especially if you are reliant on investment funding. When you get to that point, right, you've got the MVP, and even if you bootstrap that, you're going to need a round at some point. You have to have users. That traction, that pathway to revenue is much more important than revenue at that point. Again, I know it's a balancing act. Every company needs money. But the idea of having people pay for something before it actually exists, you're setting yourself up for all sorts of challenges with those customers. There are other challenges if you let people have stuff for free when it first exists, that first MVP. And you have to be, very tough on that agreement, if you will, that implicit agreement with beta users that, look, this is not going to be free forever. We want your feedback. We need your feedback. It's free right now. And it may be that, that's always free and there's a freemium model or, sponsorship. There are all sorts of ways to skin that cat. But long answer to the short question is, before there's a functional product, no, I am not in favor of getting people to pay for it.
So I know that, just looking back in your past and where you've been, what you've done, there's a lot that goes into, obviously, operations, having proper ops. And I think that's kind of what we're moving into here. But is there a time then when waiting too long to build in proper ops has cost the startup momentum or even its survival? You had talked about, a lot of them fail and things like that, but how much of that is because of ops at the right or wrong time?
Yeah, that's a tough one. Most startups fail, right? Anywhere from 90% up, depending on how you track it. Everyone agrees with that, right? 1 in 20 is the best you can hope for. And it's probably a lot worse than that if you really go back to sort of when people, just sort of get the idea off the ground and start spending time on it. So that idea of, when you build in those right structures, and when you say ops, right, whether that means a salesperson, a marketing team, people that are full-time W-2 versus 1099s, how you build that team, all of that has to be done extremely, extremely carefully, because money is tough, right? That money is tight. It's always going to be tight. I think that the first step is got to be the customer discovery, right? And I know we're going backwards. The next step is build that MVP and beta testers, right? And then you feel like, okay, I'm onto something. This is a product that some percentage of people cannot do without. They're going to pay for. Great. Then you start to look for revenue. You look for paying customers. And at that point, Ironically, when you start to not need it as much, that's when the investors come in, because when you're revenue positive and maybe on the verge of profit positive, they're like, great, that now, obviously this has been de-risked and we're ready to write checks. But the good news is that you can get there. If you can get to revenue positive and maybe even profit positive, and then you can decide if you're going to take a round or if you're going to fund the growth of the company through the profits. And at that point, then you start making decisions in terms of what must I have right now? Just like a minimally viable product needs to be only the features that must be in this version in order to get people to use it and get you to that next stage, whatever that stage is, right? Them paying or them using it and giving feedback, thousands of them using it. The same thing is true if you look at sort of the staff and the overall budget of a startup. It should be looked at through the lens of an MVP, right? So first it's one person, and then maybe it's two part-time people that are supporting that one founder. And all of that has to be what you must have to get to that next level. Wouldn't it be nice to have a PR firm? Wouldn't it be nice to have a full-time salesperson? No, that's not the type of decision you can make as a startup founder. It's got to be what you must have. Have startups failed because they didn't invest enough, right? Spend enough money on operations, on people, on marketing? Absolutely. But it's hard to say if that's why they failed, because so many startups fail no matter what. What you can say at the macro level at the top is most startups fail because they run out of money. They don't find paying customers. They run out of investments. They can't get another round. And that's why they fail. And so if they fail because they run out of money, then you've just got to be very, very careful with that money at every stage. And yes, sometimes you're too conservative, and that means you don't grow and you don't get to that next step. But I think it's more about nice to have, right? No foosball tables, no offices, no PR firms until it's critical, until I must have it. And there are startups that need PR firms earlier than others for a variety of reasons. So again, it's up to that founder to say, this is what I must have right now, and therefore I've got to spend money on it right now.
So what are the signals for that? You got early adoption, or you have adoption of some kind, it's moving the MVP along in the life cycle. And, you're trying to make some of those determinations, but you obviously still have to figure out if I even have a product, and is it solving the right problem? What are the other signals then to keep an eye on, especially for those that are new to this or that are starting things up? What do they need to look for in that 10-ish% that may be successful, or the 90% that fail? What are those signals to keep an eye for?
Yeah, I think that customer churn is very, very important in this. I think a lot of founders focus on, got to get new customers, but what's happening? Are the customers staying? Are they active in the app? So that's sort of a second thing, right? Is, are they leaving, or are they just going silent or using the app once a month, for example? Both of those are failure points. So, okay, why is that happening? That's something that you have to spend money and time on to figure out. Why is that happening? It's not just about getting new users. I think a lot of times founders are like, got 1,000 downloads, right? And so that means we're killing it. Well, no, they've got to use the app, and then they've got to keep using the app, because no matter what, if your churn is horrendous, super high, or if your, monthly average users, your engagement rate of existing customers is really low, then you're on the path to failure no matter what. It's always about sort of getting the startup to that next phase. What is that next phase? Proof of traction, proof of revenue, a pathway to revenue, a pathway to profits. And you've got to always pivot that. It could be 30 days. It could be even more frequently than that. You've got to sit down and reassess what's going on, because the one thing that I know for sure is that the initial ideas that I have had right when I started companies or joined startups, those initial ideas, that initial business model has never, ever been perfectly correct 3 years later. Not even close. Maybe once it was close to perfectly correct. And that was just dumb luck, right? It's the exception that proves the rule.
Or it was a very simple, predictable business model.
Yeah, exactly, which can be the best, right? And this is something, if you don't mind a soapbox for a couple of minutes, one of the things that I've talked to a couple of people about recently that I feel very strongly about is a great pathway for a startup is if you go into a business and you actually learn the business and become a practitioner. So our most successful startup, and the one, again, that I got the business model right away, I had been director of marketing for two of the largest trade shows in the country, and I identified a shark bite problem. And then we built a better mousetrap. There were mousetraps out there. They were not performing well. We built a better mousetrap. And then I went out and sold it. And the strength was because I had been a director of marketing, I was the prototypical customer for this product. I knew a lot of people, and I talked the talk even for people I didn't know. For 2 years, and this is not me bragging, I think I'm a decent salesperson, but not great. For 2 years, if I got a live demo, 30 minutes or an hour, I closed 50%, 50%.
Wow.
Magic.
For 2 whole years. And that's what did it. And the model there, again, is one that I don't want to say it's trivial, but it's relatively easy to replicate. It's relatively straightforward, which is to say, go into industry, become an executive in a certain area, whether it's marketing director, sales director, ops director, something like that, where you understand what the problems are and what the pain points are. Identify that the current mousetraps are not performing well. Then you can build it, and then you can sell it because you talk the talk. You speak their language, and there are all sorts of other little things like pricing, right? Pricing is always a guessing game. But if you're there as a practitioner first, you know what those relative budgets are. I knew what a relatively large trade show, I knew what the marketing budget was going to be like, and I knew that this was painful, and I knew exactly, who to go to and what to say. The product worked. That made it an easy sell. I think that's an area, founders sort of dream up, this is a great product, here's a real need, but instead become a practitioner, become a customer first. And also all of those solutions following that model is B2B, which I think is just all things being equal, much easier than B2C. B2C is always a knife fight. And B2B, again, problems, it's not perfect and most startups fail, but all things being equal, it's easier.
I love your angle on becoming an expert in whatever it is that you're trying to solve the problem for. And we see that a lot as a consultancy. We always have to become basically experts in whatever the subject matter is in order to properly help clients, overcome a hurdle or get to the actual problem to be solved and then to solve it, but doing so in their terms and on their ground. I think that's incredibly important.
Going back to that original question about sort of you've identified the problem and then how do you know how to build the solution? I knew how to build the solution because I had lived it. I not just thought about the problem or talked about it, but I lived the problem. So I knew all of the components. I knew how to, I could whiteboard it. I could say, this is what we have to build. And then my wife built it. I was super lucky, and that, allowed us to bootstrap it. And that helped obviously as well.
Well, it goes to show as well that when you have a fantastic product, marketing and sales are a lot easier, and focusing on product will help out dramatically, or can help out dramatically if you're having sluggish sales or issues with marketing. If you make a product easier to understand and or better, it makes it a lot easier on finding sales, finding customers.
So, Evan, would you say then that technical founders, those that aren't necessarily expert in what it is that they're trying to solve, often overestimate the adoption and usage phase and then underestimate the hurdles or the problem being solved? Is that a fair statement?
Yeah, I think we all do. I think anyone who's in the startup industry, one way or another, is a dreamer. I've only had sort of that one big idea, and that was really out of necessity. I just saw I was a practitioner, but I'm still a dreamer. I think we all are. I think that's a critical piece of being a founder is to, think you can change something. You can build something new that's going to change something. But what goes along with that is, I think, exactly what you said, just being overly optimistic about how easy it's going to be. And that's every stage of the process. I talked to a young founder the other day saying, these two guys from Yale got $3.1 million to build this app, and it's only half of what we're planning to do. So we should easily be able to get money. And I'm like, yeah, that's not the right logic. Most startups don't get money. You saw one that did get money. I get it that you feel like they're not doing what you're doing, but First of all, there's plenty of information that you don't have about why they got that money. Nobody writes those types of checks without doing due diligence. So there's something else there. So I think in most cases, founders underestimate how difficult it's going to be, especially first-time founders. And then the best founders are subject matter experts and dreamers, because that's where the best ideas come from. And you have to have an idea that you have to identify this is a problem, and I think I can fix it in this way. Then, you do everything else we've talked about with the customer discovery. But those founders that are subject matter experts and dreamers and start a company are likely not to be very good business people. They probably are not experienced business people. They probably never run anything, maybe not even a department with multiple people, not even P&L for, a project line or a product line or anything like that. And so that's the second challenge, is that you want them to be dreamers. You want them to be subject matter experts, because that's where the idea comes from. But then somewhere along the line, they have to surround themselves with people that can actually execute and run the business.
Yeah, being an entrepreneur and starting a new company is inherently a contrarian act, and it's also inherently a statement of arrogance, or maybe confidence if you want to use a better word. But you're basically saying that everyone in the marketplace has either not had this idea or has had and has been unable to execute on it, and you, for some reason, are going to be capable, able, and you're going to step up and earn that market share. So I think that a very healthy dose of optimism is a requirement for founders. So I think that's spot on. You said something kind of earlier on in our chat about when the investment shows up, a lot of times that's in the same moment where you don't really necessarily need it anymore. So if there's someone who's either bootstrapped or has been floundering around trying to find product market fit, and who's either got there on their own or maybe with some other people's money, stepped into it and kind of stepped into that stage, and now they're kind of at that decision point of what does going through a round look like? What does taking on investment look like? How do you coach people, or what do you impart to folks who are kind of standing at that decision point in terms of both, do you decide to do it or not? And then who do you bring in first?
Yeah, that's a great question. And also, obviously, yet another really difficult situation that founders have to navigate. It's great news that they've gotten there, right? They've gotten to the point where people are interested in writing checks, and they've gotten to the stage where it's compelling. They've got a path to revenue, or maybe profits. And at that point, it's like, well, do we take money? Do we not take money? How do we do that? I do think things have gotten a little bit easier for founders than it used to be, but at the same time, there are so many founders out there. There's so many people chasing money that it's really, really difficult. So I think that, first of all, you have to do a friends and family route. And the reason is because they're just willing to take a flyer on you. They're willing to invest, and they're willing to sort of bypass most of the due diligence. And I don't say that in a sarcastic way, or like that the founders are trying to take their family's money. But ultimately, the biggest challenge with fundraising with angels and VCs is how long it takes, even if they are interested. And they're interested for a while. And then at some point, and I've been in this position, I've written checks, not recently, you're looking for something, you're excited, and you are ready to write the check, and you keep doing the due diligence until you're not ready, until you see something that's a big enough red flag for you to flip the switch, because deal flow is probably never, ever going to be an issue from this point forward, right? It's definitely not an issue now. It's so easy to find tons and tons of really great startups to invest in. So how do you know if you need, I think the original question was the decision of whether to take the money or not. That again is about sort of getting to that next step, right? What do we need? Okay, we've got 1,000 users, 100 of them have actually bought premium. And so we feel like if we get 10,000 users, 1,000 of them will get premium, and we're home free. What do we need to get to 10,000 users? Do we need $1 million in marketing? Do we need $250,000 in marketing? Do we need a full-time salesperson? Whatever the answers are, as best you can tell, then that defines the amount of money you need to get to that next step. I hate it that there are startups that live from round to round because it's dangerous, and that's why a lot of them fail, because they run out of money. That's happened to me. Great first round, $700,000, mostly friends and family, a few angels and one VC. $700,000 gave us 2 years of runway. We did everything we were supposed to do, but we just didn't get enough customers, not enough compelling traction to get that next round. I knew we needed it. I knew I did everything I could to make that runway as long as possible, 2 full years to spend that 700. But at the end of the day, they're including, the VC and the angels that were in the first round. They begged off off because we hadn't done enough to get them to write another check. And that was the end of it. So I hate the fact that there are startups that have to live from round to round, but it's a fact of life. So if that's the model you have to follow, make sure that when it comes time for that next round, that you've done everything, you've got the compelling information, you've got the traction, the KPIs that you need. Ideally, you'd put off taking money for as long as possible. You take as little money as possible, and you stay away from VCs for as long as possible. Not because they're evil or nasty people that are trying to steal your business. Some small percentage are. I don't think most VCs are, but they have a very different model. I think you guys probably know this, but I'll say it out loud. VCs believe that 1 in 20 are going to be a home run. Then they're going to place 20 bets and they're going to push each and every one of those startups to be a home run. Now, they've self-selected startups that they think are going to be a home run, but they are not satisfied with a double. A double is failure for them because it's not going to get them the return they need. They know it's only 1 out of 20. It must be a home run, arguably a grand slam home run. And so when you take that VC money, you have to know that they're going to push you to be a grand slam home run. Most founders would say, I would love to start a company in 5 years from now, 10 million in revenue, 4 million in profit. I'm getting paid a nice salary. Everybody's getting paid. Everybody's happy. That's the American dream. But for a VC, that's a failure. It's not a criticism of the VCs. That's the way the model has to work. The whole startup ecosystem is reliant on them. They have to play the game that way.
Right. Everybody going into that situation has to be, well, at least on the application side, has to be aware that that's the likelihood, that's the possibility, right? And just, like you say, position yourself against whatever metrics you have to set yourself up to be able to scale into that next round. And as you have pointed out, even if you do everything right, there's still a very good chance that that next round is not coming, or that the next level of number of users is not coming. I guess where I'm going with that question is there a point at which the dreamer has to kind of set the dream down? If it's not painfully obvious, I'm out of money or I'm out of users, at what point do founders really need to start considering, this is as far as I'm going to get, and it's time for me to move on to something else?
Yeah, I don't remember who said it, but it's a fairly famous serial entrepreneur who's, who hit it big time with one of their startups. And they said, it's not that I'm that much better or that much smarter, but I just failed fast. You want to fail fast, right? You want to take 4 years or 2 years and, walk away rather than limping along for 10 years. And so, yes, you have to coldly look in the mirror and, obviously you run out of money. That's when the decision is taken out of your hands. But even before that, you have to look at it and say, is this worth another year of my life? Whether I'm being paid at market rate or, for most founders, it's probably below market rate, even if they're funded. That's the opportunity cost. They invest that time and effort, and it's hard. It's hard to say it's not working. But if you're going to fail, it's better to fail after 4 years than 10 every single time. But so you've just got to keep evaluating it. And it's hard. It's hard, especially when it's your idea. When it's your idea, you love it. I've been fairly lucky to see success quickly and also see failure, within 4 years, 4.5 years sometimes, rather than 10. And that's what you got to do, because we've all got limited, time on this earth and limited bets that we can place. If you want to be a serial entrepreneur, if you want to keep doing it and be a founder for your life, then you've got to place as many bets as possible. And that means walking away from the bad ones as soon as you're sure or confident that it's very likely that it's just not worth your time anymore.
Sure. Would you say that there is a particular decision or a decision-making process that you have consistently seen coming back to bite founders, like say 6 months in, a year in, something that they did or didn't do that is now the blocker for going forward? Is there anything along those lines that you see?
So a couple of areas. I think one that's fairly obvious, right, is you get 700 grand in funding and you get an office and foosball tables and, go on staff retreats to Puerto Vallarta or something like that. And,
I hear it's a great place.
you've got to always watch every penny. Every single penny. I don't care if it's t-shirts or foosball tables or, any of those things. You want to take care of people. You want to celebrate a little, but you've got to extend that runway. You've got to do everything you can to extend that runway, because the idea that the next round is coming is, maybe, maybe not. And the fact that you got one round and people loved you, as I've seen personally, doesn't mean they're going to write a check again unless you've proven yourself. The first check, sure, they want to write the second check. They want you to succeed, but they're not going to write a second check if you're not meeting the milestones that they expect you to. So that's the first thing is you get that, you have a round and you're like, oh, this is going to last forever. I can live from round to round forever. And so I'm really not going to watch this money so carefully. That's the first problem. The second problem with founders that I've seen is this idea that you can do everything, that you're good at everything. And nobody's good at everything. God knows I'm not good at everything. There are plenty of things that I can't do. You've got to surround yourself with people that can do the things that you can't do. And even if you're pretty good at everything, you still can't do everything. At some point, you've got to be able to delegate. You've got to be able to let go of some of that control. And this is, I think, related to that is founders that must make every single decision, right? They've got a COO, they've got a director of marketing, and yet they've still got to make every single decision. That's a mistake. You trust those people. You have to focus on where you can add value to the company. It doesn't mean you're not part of the conversations most of the time, but as the company grows and as the team grows, you have to be willing to let go of things. Everyone in the C-suite has to do that as the company grows with people below them. But especially the founders, they've got to be willing to let go of stuff. The worst CEOs that I've seen, both startups and other companies, are the ones that feel like everyone in this building, everyone on this team, I can do their job better. Maybe so most of the time, maybe even so 90% of the time, if you're smart enough, but it doesn't matter because you can't do all of those jobs. And you have to let people, you have to hire grown-ups and for the most part, stay out of their way. They do something wrong, you tell them, you explain it, you figure out a path forward, but you've got to hire people that are going to work for you and get things done for you. Other mistakes that founders have made, not enough customer discovery. I have fallen prey to this and I kick myself every time I do it. But you think that you're on to something. Our first super successful little startup in the trade show industry, we had 70 trade shows as customers. I had the opportunity to buy some software in a related area, a different product for the trade show industry. I didn't do enough customer discovery. I thought I could sell it to my 70 customers and others because I thought it was super cool. It was super cool. It wasn't enough. And there were a variety of reasons why the first product was successful. Fundamentally, it was a shark bite problem that people were willing to spend money on. The second one was not a shark bite problem. It was a nice to have. And I thought it was super cool. And I kidded myself and still kicked myself for, we bought the software and I couldn't sell it to 70 existing happy customers. I couldn't sell it because it was not the same. So not enough customer discovery at every single level. The founders that are convinced they're in love with their product, they're sure they've got the right solution, the right features and benefits. And then the last thing I'll say on this question is, truly holding true to an MVP. This idea that this first version of this product, and certainly in apps, this I think is a big problem, is saddling it with features that are not necessary at this point. You cannot build the perfect app the first time around, and you shouldn't. You should build the cheapest, minimally viable product. Everybody talks about it, but nobody really pays attention. When they're the ones building it, they want to build the best product right away with all these features. And it's never, ever gonna work out for a variety of reasons, right? More expensive, takes too much time, and you may be wrong about those features. You build something, quick and dirty and test it. And then the next version is also the next MVP, one or two additional features that customers are screaming for. You're letting the great get in the way of the very good. With the case of MVPs, you're letting the great get in the way of good enough. That first product should be good enough to test it and get some users and learn what's truly necessary, and then build the next MVP and the next MVP after that.
Yeah, if you don't have product market fit yet, don't worry, be crappy. Be crappy and get it in front of people. They'll tell you what they think.
Yes, for sure.
Until you have product market fit, you were drowning.
Absolutely. Evan, it has been an absolute pleasure. I want to say thanks as always to my co-pilot, Justin. And Evan, again, special thanks to you. How can people reach you, and where can they reach you?
The best way probably to reach me is through LinkedIn. It's Evan Shubin, just like it sounds, or Evan Shubin. My profile is up, and send me a message there. I'm very responsive, and that's the easiest way, and also allows you to see sort of a little bit of what I've done. The LinkedIn profile is not comprehensive, but it's a pretty good snapshot. Always happy to talk to other founders and help in any way that I can. So I do hope that people will reach out to me.
Thank you for being so generous with your time. We really, really appreciate you coming on.
Thank you, Justin. Thank you, Aaron. It was a great fun and a great pleasure.
You bet. And a special thanks as always to our listeners, and we will see you all next time on SaaS That App. Thanks for cruising along with us on SaaS That App. We hope you grabbed some insights that were inspiring, actionable, or at least entertaining.
If you enjoyed the show, don't forget to subscribe and leave a review.
Until next time, keep building, keep growing, and keep those apps sassy.